Okay, let me start this one off with a series of stupid questions. The first one is, did I leave a disc in this CD player? Of course you don't know. It's a 50-50 chance, you'd just be guessing. But now, let me ask you a similar question about this record player. Does it have a record on it now or now? And what about this reel-to-reel? Is there a tape on it here or here? And then onto this cassette player, is it ready to play a cassette in this shot or in this one? And finally, for the sake of redundancy, this 8-track player, is it ready to play some music now or now? Now, I know in the great scheme of things, this is something that really doesn't matter, but nevertheless, I'm going to carry on. It's something that's always slightly bugged me about CD players, the way they hide the CD away. I've bought players in the past on eBay, and the previous owner has accidentally left the last disc they played inside, so it's not just a problem that's affected me, but going back to the early 1980s, I remember when CDs were first introduced, and they really did look like something that had arrived from the future. And yet, the compact disc players hid those eye-catching discs away inside a drawer. Now, I always like to see the media that's being played. I like the movement of it, the mechanical progression, the spooling of a tape, the spinning of a disc, and I feel like I'm probably not alone there, because whether people realise it or not, the kinetic performance aspects of analogue physical media must surely account for some of the continuing modern-day appeal of those formats in an age of solid-state digital music. But back when the CD arrived on the scene, there must have been a desire for the player's appearances to move away from what had come before. After all, the legacy analogue formats had all been on the market for decades. The wooden laminated cases with the brushed steel fascias were very much the style of the 70s, and it was time for a totally new look for the CD player, something suitable for the 1980s. Now, one distinct change came with how you viewed the progression of playtime on a compact disc compared to the older analogue formats. With, say, a record or a tape, the movement of a tone arm or the accumulation of tape on a spool created a physical progress bar. You could see how much playtime remained just by looking at the format as it was being played. Whereas in the CD age, the indication of progress now became the responsibility of an efficient and accurate digital display. And sometimes this new look that was developed for CD players, this design language, had a knock-on effect on the older analogue formats. Those were then also hidden away in a drawer. Keeping physical media out of sight had become fashionable. Now, of course, it's not just about fashion. Components with drawers are easy to stack on top of each other in a nice compact tower. But it's important to mention that CD players didn't start off looking like this. The Philips prototype player, that was a top loader, and the CD was clearly visible through a window. You could see the silver disc spinning away inside, and Philips carried across much of that design into their first production machine, the CD-100. Now, when Sony showed off their first CD prototype, it looked like this. This is the Garonta. Notice the vertical playback orientation of the CD, and again, this one has a window on it, so you can see the disc. Interestingly, when other hi-fi manufacturers licensed the CD technology and created their own machines, many of those were based on that Sony prototype design, and as a result, many of the first wave of CD players sported the same vertical CD mechanism with a window. Now, these vertical playback machines were quite chunky, but they did have one massive advantage over the Philips top-loader design in that they were stackable, whereas, as you can see from this Philips picture, incorporating a traditional record player as well as the top-loading CD player within the same stack required some carefully designed furniture. I've got to say, though, that compared to the players that came later, I prefer the look of these earlier designs. What they might lack in practicality, they more than make up for in visual appeal. The CD was a revolutionary new audio technology, and for those fortunate enough to be able to afford one in the early days, the player really should have had looks worthy of it being the centrepiece of a hi-fi. And if you saw any of this early generation of CD players in a shop window, they would immediately draw the eye, and you'd know that you were looking at something new and different. But now, here's the twist. The manufacturers who had based their first machines on the design of the Sony prototype were totally wrong-footed when Sony themselves went on to reveal their first consumer-ready CD player, and it didn't look anything like their prototype. Instead, it had a sleek drawer-loading mechanism. As a result, the Sony CD-P1200 was significantly slimmer and neater than the competition, a feat it achieved by playing the CD horizontally inside the machine and out of sight. Now, Sony had clearly shown the way forward with this machine for the future of CD player design, and by the time the rival manufacturers introduced their second wave of machines, most of them, their CD players had started to adopt the common appearance of the Sony, one that remained much the same from then on. Experimentation in CD player designs largely fell by the wayside, and with the exception of the occasional high-end audiophile player, the standard consumer machines became almost visually indistinguishable from one another. And speaking as someone who is enthusiastic about design, for me they became uninteresting. Perfectly functional, but also totally uninspiring. I've got to think that one of the contributing reasons, there are more, behind why people aren't as interested in old compact disc players as they may be in, say, old record players or old compact cassette decks, is that it's very hard to get any kind of emotional attachment to all the decades worth of bland, black, similar yet efficient oblong CD playing boxes that followed the early 1980s. They're just so dull. Even for someone like me, who's uncommonly enthusiastic about old audio equipment, most CD players, they leave me cold. They seem to be pretty much interchangeable with one another. But I do say most, not all. There have been some beautiful CD players that can excite the eye as well as the ear, and it will come as no surprise that it's one of these that I sought out to add to my hi-fi as a functional statement piece for the CD. Now, this is a hi-fi that I've based as much around aesthetics and quirkiness as anything else. It's my living eulogy to interesting audio equipment. Now, a normal run-of-the-mill CD player wouldn't really fit in here, so instead this is the main one I use. It's a Technics SL-P1200, and let's take a closer look at it. The SL-P1200 came out in 1986. It was sold as a professional CD player. The kind of use it might go to would be as, say, a broadcast machine for a radio DJ. It's a flexible and reliable workhorse. In fact, there was a slightly modified version of this machine that was made just for the BBC, and at the time of making this video I note that Audioscope had one of those ex-BBC machines for sale and they wanted €2,790 for it. But going back to this machine that I've got, the original SL-P1200, this wasn't Technic's first professional CD player. In 1984 they'd introduced one of the most impressive looking CD players ever made, the SL-P50P. Now, this one had me at the twin VU needle meters. A CD player with VUs is not something that you see every day. But these machines were horrendously expensive, and they also sold in very small numbers, so they're pretty much unobtainable now. But this really was the machine that drew my attention to the whole Technics professional CD player range, and ultimately got me into buying one of its successors. Now, I should also mention that the P50 was absolutely gigantic. I mean, much larger than the machine that I have. It probably wouldn't have fit on my hi-fi cabinet, but I'd have given it a go. One thing that's interesting about the Technics professional machines, though, is that Technics included them within their regular consumer catalogues. And as a result, you'd get well-heeled regular people buying these pro machines to use in their homes. So anyone looking through the Technics catalogue with a desire to buy the best CD player that was in there, they'd see this machine listed as a professional broadcast model, and they'd think, well, if it's good enough for the professionals, it's good enough for me. It seems to have sold well too. It became a regular fixture in the Technics hi-fi catalogues well into the early 90s, and as a result of the player's longevity and its overlap into the consumer space, they really aren't too difficult to find nowadays. Its imposing look certainly makes it stand out from the majority of CD players. It's heavy, it's well made too, it's got a die-cast aluminium shell, and the unusual profile of it will be what prompted a number of people to ask me for more information about this mysterious object after the player briefly appeared on screen in a recent video. So for those who are interested, let me tell you all about it and what makes it different from your normal consumer machine. First off, in a way, the design is reminiscent of those early Philips players because it's a top loader and the CD is visible through a window. And the player itself, it can be used in exactly the same manner as any normal domestic machine. It's got the usual controls you'd expect: track, skip, fast forward and back, play and pause. The active functions are highlighted by LEDs, and just like any normal machine, it plays a CD from the beginning to the end. Of course, given that it's a model from 1986, you can forget about playing any discs that you've burnt on this one. It's only happy with original pressed discs, but that's no concern to me. And any reviews I've seen of this model really rate its rich sound quality, and that's a good job, as the only outputs on this one are standard RCA stereo line level. It's got no digital outputs to send this off to an external DAC. Now, a later revision, the SL-P1200X, also added XLR outputs on the back, but again, no digital. This machine's also got a couple of sockets for wiring it up to controllers, but on the front it's also got an infrared remote control receiver, and the remote is a very handy thing to have because it allows access to a couple of additional features that can't be controlled from the machine itself, and more on those later. And I nearly forgot, on the front here we've got a 1/4" headphone socket with its own volume control. One of the most notable things about this machine is how quickly it can read the table of contents from a disc. It's worth bearing in mind that this is 1986 technology, and it's quicker at doing it on this machine than any other more recent CD player I've used. And in this case, it reads the disc in under 2 seconds. And of course, once it's done that, the disc is ready to play. Now compare that to this late 90s Denon machine. This takes almost 6 seconds to read the CD contents. That's more than 3 times as long. And the less said about my SACD player, the better. I'm not sure if it's faulty, but it takes a glacial 15 seconds to read a disc. You can't have failed to notice that there are way more buttons and controls on this machine than you get on your average home CD player. So let's go through what they do. Now, one feature that's not uncommon on CD players is the ability to program in a playlist for the current CD. But here, the large keypad makes it a little bit easier to type this in. In this case, I've set it up to play back track 8, then 6, and then 2. Now let's have a play around with that search dial. A button needs to be pressed first to activate this feature, and then there's another button that lets you choose between a fast or slow scan. The slow one allows extremely accurate positioning of the laser across the CD. While this feature is active, the audio that's contained on the selected section of the disc is continuously replayed. So when the laser isn't moving but the disc is spinning, you're hearing the audio that's stored within a single rotation of the disc. This control allows a DJ to queue up the playback to within a fraction of a second. So let me give you a demo. Now, of course, in a real-world application, say you were a radio DJ, you wouldn't let the listener hear all that noise. You'd be listening to that through your headphones. You'd be queuing up the CD while another one's playing to exactly the right point, so that when you press play, it comes in just where you wanted it to. Pump up the volume. Now, rather than having to skip through a track to find the right point, if you know the timestamp for it, you can just type that in using the keypad, and then you've got it queued up there, ready for playback. And if you want to return back to that time that you've just entered again, well, just press the time recall button. On the right hand side here, this is a pitch control. It's got a detent at the 0 point. This is the kind of thing that would be handy for beat matching. But on the BBC version of this machine, that was changed to a fader. Time for a quick demo. One essential feature that's needed on any broadcast-capable CD player is the ability for it to play just a single track from a CD without it then going on to autoplay the next one like your average home player. And here that's achieved with the auto cue function. This not only puts the next track straight into pause, but it also skips past any blank space that's at the start of that track. For a DJ, this means that the track starts the instant that he presses play, with no awkward silence. Now, just to give you an example, track 1 on this CD has just over 1 second of silence before it starts. With the auto cue on, the CD is ready to play instantly, but with the auto cue turned off and starting the CD from its stopped condition, it seems to take an absolute age for the track to start. Definitely too long to have dead air on the radio. covering off any other buttons I haven't mentioned, Recall will display the playback program that you've set for the current disc. Repeat, rather obviously, replays the disc over and over, or if there's a currently active program, it'll repeat that. Auto space, well, that adds in a 3-second silence between each track. And as for those extra features that I mentioned that are only on the remote, well, Music Scan will automatically play the first 10 seconds of each track on a disc. However, you can adjust that playback time between 1 and 99 seconds by typing in a number before you press the button. I've set it here to 2 seconds. And the other extra feature on the remote is the ability to adjust the output volume. It can be attenuated down to minus 12 decibels, which would be useful in helping to match the output level to other equipment. And to round things off, we've got the usual display options for the track or album elapsed or remaining time. Now, I'd imagine a radio DJ, they'd probably have this set to show the remaining time for the current track, and you'd also have that auto cue activated to prevent the CD going on to play the next track. Now, in this home environment, I just tend to let the whole CD play like it would in any normal CD player. But the extra control that this machine offers over playback can come in handy every now and again. In summary, I just like using this machine. It's an impressively put together, solid piece of professional equipment, and yet it's just as at home in the home. It's heavy, it's imposing. If it fell on you, it'd kill you. It'll probably keep going though afterwards. It sounds great as well. It more resembles something that could be used to fire a super laser from the Death Star than it does your average CD player, and as a result it earns a top shelf place in my hi-fi. For me, it's an appropriate celebration of the CD on its 40th anniversary. However, this isn't the only interesting CD player that I've bought recently, but that'll be something I'll show you another day. Anyway, that's it for the moment. As always, thanks for watching.